Just start. And welcome everybody to a wet and windy Wednesday morning here in the UK, but here we are, and every Wednesday morning we come together to talk about humanizing transformation. Sometimes we go broad, sometimes we deep dive into a particular area of framework, approach or practice. But you know, I wanted to do something just a little bit different today. So I wanted to just throw out a wee bit of a provocation. And those of you that follow me on LinkedIn will know that I've already kind of been poking and prodding this week with a wee bit of a provocation. And the provocation really started kind of forming in my head last week, which is, we all know this kind of, you know, this conundrum, this philosophical conundrum that we have at dinner parties, at conversations, which came first? Was it the chicken or the egg? And you know, as soon as you philosophically kind of think about it, you think you know the answer, and then all of a sudden you don't, and you know, you're trying to understand which way to go. So the provocation that I popped out, of course, at the beginning of this week is, which comes first? Is it insight or action? And it's been a buoyant conversation on social media, I shall have everybody know. What is interesting is that there are three camps. There are those that think insight does come before action. There are those that are saying actions actually inform the insights. And there are also those that say both. So it seems that we do have three camps, and still, even since this morning, some incredibly healthy conversation around those two things. Why is this all important? Well, we've probably all seen the data pyramid before, and you know, recognizing that data drives information, that drives our knowledge, that ultimately, you know, in a hierarchical pyramid should open up wisdom. But what do we mean by data? What do we actually mean by data? Can data itself be an action that then can drive that insight and that information, or not? Very, very interesting. In order to answer the question, I think what is really important is for us to understand, all of us, regardless of what our job is. It doesn't matter if we're not in the world of change and transformation directly. We are in the world of change and transformation indirectly. That's a fact. That's a given for each and every one of us. And I've introduced the Canevan Model before, but what I like here is a great blog that was published in Medium has actually expanded the Canevan Model. And I think what is important here is two things. The first thing is that for an awful long time, the way that we have evolved, matured, managed and organized change and transformation has been based on frameworks and models and processes that have assumed our world is simple and known, aka obvious. We know and can identify our challenge or opportunity. We know and can identify the single solution to get us there and how to get there. So, you know, everything has been based on that. Yes, we've got things like Agile that allow us to iterate our way, which is great. But from a strategic perspective, everything really has been designed around this obvious kind of frame. And that's exactly what the world was like, right? Back in the day, the manufacturing industries, and you know, when the corporate system, the organizational structure was created. And Michael Porter has exacerbated that since the 70s with his formula for profitability and success. So it's been driven, it's been proven that we should be focusing on these models and frameworks and processes that, you know, are derived from this world of simplicity, from this world of obvious. But we all know that we're not there anymore. We all know that we are shifting into that top right complicated world, which is basically, we can identify the problem and the solution, but we're not too sure what, sorry, the problem or the opportunity, but we're not too sure what the solution looks like. So we need to be open-minded about how we get there. And certainly, Anna, in your world, because you're in a fast-moving world, in the world of web, that's really, really important. So a lot of conversation and a lot of leadership development and change and transformation practice has been saying, okay, so how do we operate in a complicated situation, in a complicated environment, or with complicated conditions around us? But just in the last 12 months, if you have a look in social media, if you can see the groundswell of conversation that's coming up, what we are recognizing is that we are not even in complicated anymore. We are somewhere between complex and complicated. And that is absolutely real. I was client side yesterday, really, really interesting. I was we're delivering a transformation program that is almost exactly the same in terms of its environment from a transformation program that we delivered 5 years ago. But the conditions are completely different, and the human mindsets are completely different. And what we've recognized is that 5 years ago, we were designing and implementing the Dilyn Way within a complicated situation, in a complicated human system. Yesterday, what we realized at the end of the day was we need to design for complex. We need to design for the complex, which is a completely different way of delivering and designing. And the big thing about complex is twofold. Number one, it is the understanding that it's actually quite difficult for us to really tap into the challenge and the opportunity in terms of clarity. It's like, it's a wicked problem. It's so big, it's really hard to really hone in on it. And equally, the solution becomes even more intangible because of that. So how on earth do we navigate that? That's the definition of complexity. And the way that we navigate it is in that third bullet point that you see there: pattern management, multi-experimentation. And that's where the secret to this provocation that I've put out over the last few days is coming in. So the key thing really is insights that inform action are where we are perhaps in a very, very, very fortuitous situation where we've still got a little bit of obvious, but we're probably in a complicated environment, because good practice will work for us. Process support will work for us. Consistency still, is something that is relevant to us. And the planning management is supported by the models and the frameworks that we've already got in existence around us. So insight informs action will help us in that complicated world. But when we get to complex, it's not going to work. It's absolutely not going to work. So we do need to think about what are the actions that we take to inform the insight, because the situation that we're in is unique to us. We can take best practice or good practice, because I don't really believe in best practice. We can take good practice externally to help and inform us, but they cannot be the reason why we make decisions. The reason why we make decisions has to be driven from insight from our own action. And that is where we unlock transformation. And the way to unlock that transformation, the way to build that capability for that action informs insight, is through developing the experimental mindset, which of course is the second of the 7 mindsets. The key thing is less about planning management and it's more about outcome focus. That's a really big provocation for the world of PMO, by the way, Dilyn, is just thinking about, how these two things can coexist still within some sort of frame that has to bring both of these two things into play. And I think something that is very, very important for us to recognize as well, and I think this is something that plays into your world, Anna, very much, is in order for us to recognize that no 2 moments are going to be the same, that everything we do is subject to evolution because of the conditions and environment around us, we have to develop an agile, an anti-fragile frame and mindset. And an anti-fragile mindset is really what you've probably heard of as resilience. Now, for us in the Dilyn Way, we're less we're less kind of, you know, we're less open to the word resilience, because you can say that I am resilient, which means that you have come to a point. I am resilient, therefore. But anti-fragile allows us to be constantly thinking about evolving. So anti-fragile doesn't necessarily have a stopgap. It's not an end point. It's not I've achieved it, therefore I am. Anti-fragile is something that, you know, it comes and goes, and it is a spectrum, and we can all feel that and sense that in our daily lives. So the answer to the question absolutely is this, you know, a bird in hand is better than, you know, two in the bush. So we need to understand when insight informs action works, but we also need to start introducing action informs insights into our work. How do we do that? Because that is the, you know, that is the top right hand side of the Canevan model. How do these two things coexist when we have compliance, when we have governance, when we have planning, when we have frameworks that we need to understand, when we need to follow good practice, etc., etc., when we've got checks and balances and reporting? How do we understand and start to integrate this sense of action informs insight and experimental practice? It's so incredibly important. And the answer is not agile, because and it's not. We had a fantastic story from the field, masterclass last week in our community. Lady called Barbara came along, and Barbara was part of the conversations of the beginning of Agile. She was there sitting at the table with everyone else when they were putting together the Agile manifesto and the values, and her insight, her experience that she brought into last week's masterclass was actually absolutely fantastic. So if you'd like to get access to that masterclass, do let me know, and we'll tell you how you can do that. But the key thing is this, you know, she was saying daily stand-ups, retrospectives, all of that kind of stuff, all of that process stuff, all of that frame stuff around Agile is nothing without us understanding what it means to be agile and adaptive, which is exactly what the right-hand side of this screen tells us. So for the rest of today's session, what I want to do is I just want to say that I have brought you all here under false pretense. Because you know, action informs insight is one of our modern leadership and practitioner principles, of which there are 10. But really, the story that I've just taken you on with that first principle, actions inform insight, is that the story and the message is this: our practice has to change. Because if our practice changes, then we can start to edge and evolve the frameworks and the approaches that we're using. Those frameworks and approaches are there to guide us and help us. They are not there necessarily to dictate what we do and when we do it. So where does the agility within the frameworks and the approaches that we're using comes from? And how do we, first and foremost, really start thinking about our own modern practice? And we have these 10 principles that are used in our leadership development, they are used in our mentoring and coaching, and they are used in all of our practitioner training. So we bring and support individuals and teams. We bring and support them to help them integrate and embed these 10 principles into their practice. So the question of the provocation today really is not whether it's actions inform insight or insight informs action, because clearly both are relevant. It's just a matter of when. But we need to balance and harmonize the two and not just think it's one or the other. But the real provocation is this: how and where are you bringing these modern principles into your own practice, regardless of whether you are in the world of change and transformation or not, because change and transformation is happening to all of us. So these 10 principles of practice are relevant to absolutely everybody. And again, you know, just to give you an example of being within a huge corporate professional services environment yesterday, and, you know, talking about these practitioner principles with individuals and them suddenly recognizing, my gosh, you know, the way that I think, the way that I behave is all within my gift of permission. So even if the system around me is stuck, I still can move myself, and I can move through my own practice. So these are really, really, really important. And I want to take us through them very briefly today as part of today's session. And these practitioner principles, leadership principles, modern work practice principles, they're so relevant to each and every one of us, and they are integral to the Dilyn Way framework. So the first one that we've got is we have to start balancing and harmonizing actions drive insight into the way that we work, so that we are not in the left-hand side of that screen that I showed earlier on. And that is, you know, thinking about how do we develop experimental practice in our ways of working. And a simple little thing for you to do, a simple little hack, a simple little trick is this: whenever you're about to make a decision, whenever you are about to have a conversation about a solution or which way should we go, just say, how many right answers are there? And if you have that habitual practice of just questioning how many right answers are there here, instead of which right answer should we be going for, you will naturally build that anti-fragile mindset. It will naturally drive that evolution within who you are in your practice. It's such a simple but powerful hack. How many right answers are there? So that's principle number one. Principle number two is learning is accelerated when socialized. I cannot, you know, just amplify this and just share with you how important this second principle is. I am sure that you all know loads of stuff that I don't know. I am sure, and I can guarantee that you have unique experiences. We all do. And I, you know, testament to everybody being on today's call means that we have a learner's mindset, because we are willing to give time to our own evolution, self and professional development. So this principle is really important. Now, the question is this: how are you accelerating the learning, the evolution of today's conversation for yourself and for others? So how are you socializing it so that you deepen it for yourself? How are you socializing it so that you are able to expand it and amplify it out to others? And we can share what we learn in traditional ways. We can teach what we learn. We can coach and mentor what we learn. We can just basically connect in with somebody that we know and hold ourselves to account with what we learn. I think the most important thing here is not to take learning as something that is individual and personal and just for me. Learning is democratic. Learning is for everyone, and what we learn should be open by default. So how do we socialize it to accelerate it? That's a super important modern practice principle. The third principle really stems from the first two, which is we are the role model. You know, it all starts with us. This sense of a ripple effect, this sense of, if we want our project or our program, and just quick hello to Biliana, who's just joined us, you know, working on complex transformation projects and programs, there is always for us an element of working with the PMO, working with the practitioners and saying, okay, what's the uniqueness of this transformation? What are the requirements and the outcomes of this transformation? What is the uniqueness of the conditions and environment of this transformation? Okay, how and who do we need to be? So how does our role modeling, how does our modern leadership contribute to success? So it's not about what we need to do. When we start a new project and program as modern practitioners, we also need to be asking ourselves, who do we need to be to deliver and a successful change or transformation program. So we need to think about ourselves as participants and how our strengths within the 7 mindsets of modern leadership play into this. Really, really important. And it doesn't matter what the project or program is. Community management, for you, Mo, there's stuff in there. The world of the world of web and the internet for you, Anna. There's still, even though the what that we're delivering might feel very technical or very purist or so far removed from who I am, if we are driving it, leading it, or a part of the change and transformation, it is to think about who we are to impact it. And I had a chat yesterday as part of the conversation that I've mentioned earlier on with the program director. And the program director was, I had this very same conversation. Who do you need to be and the team that you are leading in order to contribute to the success of this? And they had never thought about that because it's not something that has been part of their professional development. Super, 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 super important. Principle number 4 is power versus force. This is a really interesting one. And version 9 of the Dilyn Way framework, which is launching in February of 2023, is going to be really putting the heat behind this particular principle. Now, you'd look at this and you go, well, what's the difference between power and force, Mel? Surely there's not, is there a difference between the two? They sound like the same to me. And yeah, they do sound like the same because they are used, we rip and replace one for the other in natural conversation, and probably not with a lot of thought. But what do they mean specifically for us? Force is where we are actually influencing and manipulating. Now, if you look and do a search on Google for definitions of leadership, good leadership, probably what will come back to you is good leadership. Exemplar leadership is defined by your quotient of influence. The more influential you are, then the better the leader you are. And that's part of the old construct. That's part of the old Michael Porter approach. And it's not necessarily so anymore. Relational engagement, positive relational energy has actually started to show statistically that it's far more potent than this sense of manipulation or influence, nudging people. And, nudge theory is something that I think has got a place, but shouldn't be a default in any project or program. So power is actually inside us. Force is outside us. So what we want to be doing is we want to be giving ourselves time to understand our own power and what our own willpower is, and thinking about how we can emanate positive relational energy out within our projects and programs. If you go and have a look at the work of Kim Cameron in Michigan University, you will see that for more than a decade, there has been some outstanding research done within organizational change and transformation to show that positive relational energy as a focus, as a commitment to our own self and professional development, as a competency, far outweighs some of the other more tangible areas of leadership definition. Really, really interesting one. If you would like to know a little bit more about Principle 4, then please do let me know. Principle 5. Choose you Popo. I don't know how many of you have heard of VUCA, but you've probably seen me mention this before. We do not use VUCA in our work anywhere. Not when we are with users, not when we are engaging with the system. And we try and encourage all practitioners and modern leaders to favour UPOPO over VUCA. Now, VUCA, if you haven't heard of it, is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Now, as soon as you put those 4 words into a conversation, what that does is it ignites that reptilian brain within the users, and it says, dear God in heaven, how am I going to protect myself? So what you're doing, you're trying to decrease resistance to change And using something like VUCA, you know, without realizing it, without intentionally realizing this, you could be actually contributing to resistance to change, because you might be sparking the fight, flight, or freeze chemicals within the body. So what's the option? What's the alternative? Just talk about untapped potential and possibility. You know, the reframe of language is super, super, super important. And if I had a penny for every time I have worked with a team, worked with a leadership team, last week, I was with a leadership team at the beginning of a very, very, very complex transformational conversation. And VUCA came into conversation. Really interesting, because it was stifled. There was friction in the room. So I stopped and I said, okay, I sense something here because I'm facilitating conversation. Let's reframe. Let's reframe to UPOPO. Friction decreases, openness increases, conversation starts flowing. Right, so just thinking about something like that, and UPOPO is just one reframe. There are so many reframes that we can bring in, but thinking about language is so super important. Really important. The next principle number 6, is awareness and attention. This AA is for me like a AA battery. This is your Duracell battery for modern practice and modern leadership, because this is about inner and outer awareness, but it's also paying attention to people around you, paying attention to the external world to observe truth and fact versus perception and reality. And what you will find is that resistance to change, immunity to change, is more often based on somebody's perception, which is their reality, which is not truth and fact. And I can guarantee you now, trying to change somebody's perception of reality is a very difficult thing. You can't just throw truth and fact at somebody who already has a perception of reality which is alternative, you know, which is potentially negative, which is, you know, potentially saying this change and transformation is actually going to be bad for me. You can't just throw truth to them and think that they're going to change. We have to understand mindset work. We have to understand modern mindset theory. So the observation, paying attention to external difference between truth and fact is really important. And then inner awareness of who we are, as well as that outer awareness and support. So AA, truth, truth and fact, inner awareness of who we are, awareness and attention is the AA of 7. Really, really important. Principle number 7 is humanity first and digital always. Now, I'm just giving you guys a little bit of a heads up on version 9 in February. So there's a few things that we've already introduced as soft launch in our practice indicators and approach. But this is one of them. We have, since 2013-14, had Principle 7 as human first and digital always. But in version 9, it is moving to humanity first. And, you know, I'm hoping that to you, it's kind of obvious already. This is because we have to bring environment, we have to bring sustainability, we have to bring ethics higher up in the frame of who we are and what we do and how we do it. So humanity first and digital always is our 7th principle of modern practice and modern leadership. The reason why it's humanity first, digital always, is that we have to have within our belief system, and this is something for us philosophically to go away and think about. This is something for each and every one of us to go away and just to spend time thinking about. Because the truth of the matter is this: there is always a digital uplift. But oftentimes the digital uplift is not direct. It is indirect. It might be in the process area, robotic process automation. If we are to automate those processes, you know, the indirect digital uplift for the humanity aspect, the outcome for humanity will be there. So it's thinking about the difference, the nuances between digital direct impact versus digital indirect impact. So super important. Just going to have a quick look at, so just looking here, absolutely. Oh, Billiana, I love that. I agree and disagree with power versus force. There is a fantastic book that talks to power versus force. And I think the name of the guy is David Hawkins, and the title of the book is Power versus Force. It's hugely academic. So I tell you, you know what, just, have yourself a glass of wine or something before you start reading it, because it's really deep. But it is a fantastic book to help you to understand the nuance between the two. And it is a really, really good bridge into relational energy and frequency of leadership. And by the way, it's not new and it's not voodoo hoodoo. It is very, very academic and very, very scientific. So that might be something for you to go and look at. Really, really important. It all depends on, do you have the time to implement power, and also do the teams know what good looks like? Yeah, you're absolutely right. Do you know, Billiana, what you're pulling out there is something really important. These 10 principles can't exist in silo. They need each other. They need each other. Because they don't operate in a vacuum. You have to have all of them. It's how do we embed them all with, in a harmonious way within our practice. Principle 6, is it not similar to immunities to change? You are damn right it is. Yes, absolutely. It is very similar to immunity to change. And once you recognize it, to be immunity versus resistance, bingo, you've got that technique, you've got that practice that you can put into play without question. So fantastic. Thank you for those. Absolutely brilliant. Now, this is where I give everybody a little bit of a kind of push and a nudge. Implementation. The best way to learn is to teach and to coach and to mentor, but also integrating the Dilyn Way into our practice using micro shifts. And the third bit, which is where I want to nudge everybody, giving ourselves time to reflect and grow. Now, we have something which is called an implementation day that we help our practitioners and our customers, our leaders to commit to. And an implementation day is where we take a stop moment. Now, how many of you give yourself the permission to have a stop moment? And a stop moment is directly taken from the sport, peak performance and sport world and the sport industry and sports sector. And basically what this means is, if you are training for a race, you train, that's your learning, that's your exercising, that's your stretching and building your muscles, but you don't go straight into race day. You always have stop. And stop is where the magic happens. Stop is where the muscle does get to a point where it is growing into the stretch that you've given it, or the fattening up of that muscle. Without stop moments, all that happens is everything gets tension and goes back, and we end up with injury. So this sense of stop, in order for us to reflect and to grow into that stretch from teaching and learning and coaching and integrating, is so incredibly important. So implementation as a concept, as a modern principle of practice, is something that we always bring up in conversation with practitioners and leaders in particular. And you know what? 99.9% of leaders and practitioners say, actually, I don't give myself permission for this. I really don't. And actually, what I'm recognizing, Mel, is that I do a lot of kind of personal development, but I don't have stop. I don't have stop time for it to go in, for it to just seep into that kind of unconscious brain. So super important, because you've got to, if we think about our brains and our hearts as muscles, and a heart is a muscle, then we wouldn't disregard the stop. We wouldn't disregard that moment. So it's incredibly important for us to have that stop element. And principle number 9 is this: create forward and measure back. Now, this is really, really interesting. This is the difference between improvement and innovation. Now, the question that we need to always have top of mind as change and transformation practitioners, as modern leaders, is this: is what I am doing right here, right now, improvement or innovation? Am I innovating or am I improvement? What is the need? And if the need is improvement, then what I am doing is I am looking at my current situation and I am trying to make it faster and better and smarter in order to improve what I have got and what I am doing. And that's fine, that's improvement, if that's what's required. But if difference is required, then you're basically knocking on the door of innovation. You're knocking on the door of transform versus changing what I've got. And if you're doing that, then it is not for you to think about, how do I move from where I am? What does design look like to go from here to here? What you need to do is you need to spend the time to design that future state, and to design that future state in a way that you can really articulate it. So what you're doing then is you go to that future state to design your step forward, so that you are constantly stepping by designing towards the future. And then what we can do is we can measure back from our progress. There's a subtle difference here, with the mindset of a lot of practitioners that I work with, that are very much trained in this create from the past and now, as opposed to, and actually measuring forward. So this is where I want to go in the next step. This is where I want to go in the next step. No, that measure back and create forward. It's something, again, for us to reflect upon and think about and understand the nuance between flipping that upside down. Really, really important. And if you're in a project or program that absolutely is evolutionary, and what I mean by that is it's constantly going to be changing. So even at the end of the tangible project or program, that you have to implement sustain. That the ability for the users, or the ability for what you are designing, needs to be able to continue to evolve. Then really what you need to do is you need to be thinking about this sense of create forward and measure back. So powerful. And the final principle is very simply this: practice does not make perfect in the world that we live in. Practice makes progress, which is a lovely full circle to the very first principle. This is all about, we have to be doing to learn. We have to understand the lived experience. There's so many different ways of understanding this, but the key thing for us to do is to move. Resistance to change and immunity to change is stuckness. It's a lack of movement, which brings friction into change and transformation. Now, if we are able to role model tiny shifts, to role model progress, to role model a sense of movement within change and transformation, then that vibe will go out around us. Really, really super important. And something for all of us as practitioners to be mindful of, and this is a conversation that we had yesterday, is this: I spent a lot of time with users yesterday. Now, the users did not believe that change and transformation was happening because it hadn't yet touched them. Now, I know that there's a huge amount of work happening within the change and transformation, but it hadn't yet touched all of the end users. So transparency and openness is super important. So it's really, again, this practice makes progress. We've got to make sure that our progress, what we are doing, is as open and as transparent for all of the users that are impacted by change and transformation as possible. And at its highest level of maturity, this is working out loud. So it's not sharing PowerPoints, it's not sharing progress reports, it's sharing what we are doing in the moment with people. So super important. So, you know, you can think there's digital mechanisms that we can use, you know, to do that. If you're thinking about Jira for, you know, stand-ups and Kanbans and so on and so forth, they can be access all areas, they can be visible for all of the users for them to be able to see. Because what you don't want is what I experienced yesterday, is knowing that there's so much change happening, but for the end users, because it hasn't yet arrived in their world for their practice, they think nothing is happening. And that creates friction around change, friction of change, resistance to change, immunity to change. So those are the 7 principles, the 10 principles, from actions inform insight all the way through to practice makes progress. They're so important. And just as Biljana, you know, inadvertently but beautifully picked up, is that they don't live in silo. You know, each and every one of them needs to be in some way, shape, in harmony. And we lean in and out of these as and when we need to, depending on the moment that we're in. But all of them together collectively give us a sense of modern practice in terms of who we are as practitioners and modern leaders. So just bringing today's session to a close, we're on public session. So just to let everybody know that everything that I talk about here is part of the Dilyn Way framework, approach and practice. And we also have a professional certification in those that framework, the approach and those practices, which is called Humanising Transformation, a professional certificate in Humanising Transformation. And of course, we had to get on the bandwagon of everybody else that's talking about Black Friday at the moment. So we've got a Black Friday deal. So anyone who wants to, you know, take advantage of this in terms of themselves or part of their team, then we've got a Black Friday deal coming up soon, which I think is going to be launched today in the public arena. And basically what it is on Friday for 24 hours, if you register your interest, then you will have access to the, I think the discount, which is, I think, 33% off all of our academy training programs. So that's our Black Friday deal, which is coming up this week. And also just to let everybody know, as always, whether you know me or not, whether you are new to these sessions or not, it doesn't matter. We are philosophically and humanely connected to helping evolve the way we think about business and work. So if there's something today that has provoked something for you, then please do take advantage of a strategy session with myself. There is no commitment. It is just for me to help you. And that is available in the email that we'll send out to you with today's replay. So please do take advantage of that if there's anything of interest to you. So what's the summary for today? Well, the summary for today is this. Experimental practice is the key to unlocking future. It's the key to unlocking thriving, because we are moving more and more to that complex world. So it's not about throwing away the baby with the bathwater. It's about harmonizing. Insight drives action as well as actions drive insights. And the other thing as well is start to think about your own principles of practice that define you as modern, that defines you as supporting the transformational side, the future-orientated side of change versus the improvement side of change. And I do think that's really important. And to get a little bit radical, well, look at the Semco style quote that I've got here. You know, the last line is so potent that, you know, Semco now, which is a huge global organization, believing that the system that we are living in, which is the system and leadership, is broken and needs to be transformed. So the very way that we are doing the structure within the way that we are doing change and transformation and delivering change and transformation is fundamentally broken. So you know what, that sense of being complex has never been truer, because it's not just us going in and doing change and transformation anymore. The very structures around us. I mean, how many times have you been thwarted by processes that are, you know, are unnecessary, but you've got to follow them? Rules and policies that you know are just old hat, but you've got to follow them. You've got to put the tick box in. You know, leadership mindsets that you know are just not seeing the potential and possibility. So it's true to say, as radical as it sounds, that the system is broken and needs to be transformed. So that adds to the complexity of our role as modern leaders and change practitioners. Banana skins. The banana skins today are very, very simple. And I've just hinted at it. The first thing is conformity. There are times that we have to, because of safety, because of compliance, because of some regulations and policy rules, but we don't have to 100%. You know, the micro shifts towards modernity will always be there. It's so incredibly important, which allows me to then kind of, you know, bring you to the second one, which is breaking it down. This might feel overwhelming. Something in what I've said today might spark something for you, but you feel, God, where am I going to do it? And how am I going to do it? If it feels too hard, then it's not small enough. And that's one of our practice lines. If it feels too hard, it's not small enough. Break it down, break it down, break it down. And everything can be broken down to something that is doable, to something that is actionable in order to drive an insight. And I can guarantee that, because I've never come across anything that cannot be broken down to a point where we can take action upon it. It's just the time and the effort for us to really think about breaking it down. So don't conform to everything. And if it's too hard, then just, you know, break it down a little bit more. And then just think about where you can challenge yourself around these 10 principles, and think about where you might yourself be able to make some quantum shifts. They don't have to be big shifts. You don't have to think, God, blimey, how am I going to, I like implementation time, Mel, but where am I going to do it? Do it for a minute. You know, I've had a leader that did things for 30 seconds at the beginning of my work with them, and they are amazing in terms of, you know, where they're at now and what they're delivering, how they are being perceived by others as a modern leader. It just, whatever is right for you in terms of that start point of quantum shifts. So there we go, a whistle-stop tour of the 10 principles of practice for modern leaders and practitioners. So the ruse that I got you here on today, which is the chicken and egg provocation, was, you know, a little bit of under false pretense. But, you know, what can I say? Today was really about those 10 principles. And I just want to, I'm going to stop recording now and just bring everybody into the